So as I mentioned this morning, we're going to engage in a challenging topic, rated PG for sure. Parental guidance is necessary. But before we go there, would you join with me in prayer? Jesus, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for revealing yourself to humanity, for not only declaring that you are the way, that you are the truth, and that you are the life, but backing it up with firm evidence. We thank you for the way that you have influenced and affected so positively history, changing hundreds, thousands, millions of people's lives, who as they have come into contact with you and have come to a place of recognizing that you are the truth, you've changed them. I thank you for the many of us who have gathered this morning to worship you, who can testify to that. You've changed our life because you're the truth. You're the truth. And I ask that as we enter into this month-long conversation about your design for who we are as people and the way that you designed us as sexual beings, that the truth will be clearly understood, that our minds and that our ears and that our hearts would be able to soak it in, that you would cut through the lies and the deceptions, the false truths of society that Satan has been placing for thousands and thousands of years in the hearts and minds of people. So speak through the word this morning. Speak through your Spirit. Challenge, strengthen, encourage, enlighten, and help us. It's in your name, Jesus, that I ask these things. Amen. I don't know how many of you pay attention to the news. I'm sure many of you do, but there was a fun story, Thursday, Friday, about National Donut Day. Did you know it was National Donut Day on Friday? Unfortunately, I didn't make my way to get a donut. I love donuts, but I didn't get there. But it was a national holiday. There's all the story about where donuts came from and who the guy was who came up with it. You know, June has a lot of national holidays to it. June the 1st has several associated with it. Take a look at just a couple of them. National Go Barefoot Day was June the 1st, along with National Hazelnut Cake Day. And then you need to wash it down with a nice glass of cold milk, because it was World Milk Day on June the 1st. But not only that, we have a few more national holidays. It was in case the cake kind of got stuck and the milk didn't get it washed down, the National Heimlich Maneuver Day was June the 1st. Along with, if you wanted a piece of cake and a nice cold glass of milk, you should probably say something nice, because it was National Say Something Nice Day on June the 1st. But, of course, the weather had to get stuck in there too, right? With national warning, it's hurricane season. And then, of course, because you're eating cake and donuts, you need to go for a run. And it was National Go for a Run Day. So there's all kinds of interesting holidays in the month of June. And last year, when I opened my calendar on June 1st, I was informed that June 1st was national beginning of the month for Pride Month. So maybe you encountered that too. Last year when I opened my calendar, it was the first time this ever happened to me, it said National LGBTQ Pride Month. And then I thought, I didn't put that on my calendar. How did that get it on my calendar? Did a staff member somehow put that on the calendar? I want to investigate it. I'm trying to figure this out. How did this get on my calendar? And then it dawned on me, this is a Google calendar. It was Google that put it on my calendar. National LGBTQ. This is Pride Month. Now, I'm not telling you anything. You're already aware of that, right? You already know it's Pride Month. Pride Month. About a week after I opened my calendar last year, I got an email from somebody within our church, and this individual said to me, he said, Pastor Kirk, would you mind addressing this topic? And I wrote back and I said, I've been thinking about this as well, but I think I'm going to save it for next year as we begin Pride Month next year. And I can't believe it's been a whole year. A whole year has gone by, and here we are. And today I'm going to begin a series, a 4-week series called God and Sexuality. God and Sexuality. This is a series designed to help us to understand what God has to say about sex. As I said earlier, this is a PG-rated series, parental guidance. Now, not because I'm going to be saying and using language or illustrations or words that are, I don't know, big and shocking and all of that, but because I will talk about sex, and sex is something that parents, we have the responsibility to disciple our children in understanding how God made us as people. So I'll be talking about sex over the next month, 4 Sundays. And parents, it's up to you to kind of supplement that and help your kids and teens digest and process and understand what God has to say about our sexuality. A couple other comments before we jump into the message for today. This, no doubt, is a difficult subject to talk about. Many of us have been hurt. Others of us have done the hurting. And so when we begin to talk about sexuality, it brings up hurt, guilt, shame, past choices, past behaviors. So my desire in the series is to be sensitive as we talk through, to be full of grace and yet full of truth in digging into the topic. I also want to be sensitive to the fact that people are struggling to, especially within our culture, struggling to understand their own sexuality. And how should we as people, how should we as the church respond to them? So this is going to be a challenging topic, and there's so much to say about the topic. There's no way that I can fit it all in 30 minutes. So 4 weeks, and here's the titles of each of the messages. Today is relativism and sexuality. Next week will be deviation, how all of us have gone astray. Every one of us have gone astray. Deviation and sexuality. The third week will be identity and sexuality. And then finally, the last week, we'll deal with sex and sexuality. For those of you who may have questions, what is the church's position? There is a 6-page document that's out in the lobby that's made available to you. Feel free to pick it up, and you can read through that. Most likely, most of the content of this will be covered in the last 2 messages of the series. Finally, culture is discipling you. Right? Culture is discipling us on sexuality. And what do I mean by that? To be a disciple is to be somebody who is a follower, right? So 2 weeks ago, in Search of the Devoted One, we looked at how Jesus was traveling along, and there were crowds of people who were traveling with Jesus. And Jesus said, unless you hate your mother, brother, father, sister, mother, even your own life, and turn and come and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. Right? And Jesus was helping us to understand that what discipleship is this deep commitment. It's this commitment to a certain belief system, certain structure, or certain way of living. Our culture is discipling us. Our culture is inviting us to accept an idea about sexuality. It's doing it constantly. right? So this month alone, you will receive hundreds, if not thousands, of LGBTQ plus messages in the forms of commercials, radio ads, movies, little promos to athletic events. Back in March, or just last month at the NFL draft day, my boys and I we're watching some of that. The NFL. The NFL is pride. There's some commercial like we're pride supportive. You're gonna hear these messages and see them in speeches by political leaders, on and on and on. And here's what the root of the message is going to be. It's going to be to encourage you to embrace an LGBTQ plus sexuality as it being normal, as it being good, as it being healthy, as it being something that even you should feel comfortable to pursue. You see, culture is discipling us to accept these ideas that sexuality, LGBTQ sexuality, is normal, good, healthy. And it's the truth. It's the truth about sexuality. This is the truth. This is scientifically studied. This is the way that people are. We should embrace this. And then, of course, if you don't, then you're not nice. And then once we get through this month, you're going to be inundated with hundreds, thousands of other sexually explicit and suggestive ideas about heterosexual sexuality. You'll encounter movies, you'll encounter these themes in music, in novels, and speeches, and on and on and on in society. And the message there that our culture continues to say to us is, pursue sex as you desire, with whomever you desire, in whatever way you desire, as long as it's a consensual relationship. And this message is repeated over and over and over and over again. And you are told, that is the truth. This is the truth. Accept this as true. Go and pursue your sexual desires. Society puts so many things out there for us to go ahead and gratify ourselves and make it normal. I just have a question. Is that the truth? Is that really the truth? I mean, is the message that we hear over and over and over and over and over and over and over, is it the truth? I think it's a fair question to ask. It presents itself as the truth. So can I ask, and can I encourage you to ask, is it really the truth? I mean, because the truth matters, doesn't it? Because the truth, or whatever it is that we believe, is what it is that we then build our life upon. It has tremendous effects upon then the things that we do and how we behave. Is it the truth? That's my question this morning. And then my invitation is for all of us to have our antennas up. Not just today, not just this month, but always. To have our antennas up. To have our ears open. To be asking the question, this message that is being told to me, is it really true? It feels true, it sounds true, it tastes true, but is it really true? Is it really true? That's the question for us this morning. We're going to look at today and next week at the book of Romans chapter 1. And if you have a Bible, I invite you to open up to chapter 1. And we're going to look today at verse 18 to 25. Next week, Pastor Joe will be leading us through looking at 26 to the end of the chapter and even a little bit maybe into chapter 2. But today, the Apostle Paul writes to Rome, and I'm going to read the text, and then I'm going to give us some historical background so we get an understanding of the culture, the people that he's writing to. Paul writes these words. He says, "The wrath of God." Oh man, that sounds so harsh, doesn't it? The wrath of God. Basically what Paul is saying is that God sees things that aren't going well, and he's disappointed by that. So much so that it evokes a strong emotion from him because he sees people living in ways that are destructive to them and to other people. And so the wrath of God, which really is a positive thing when you think about what is the truth, and if people are perverting truth and then living in destructive ways, it becomes a good thing to see somebody angry about bad things being said that they're good. That's what Paul is saying. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. We can look around and see God is speaking constantly. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor did they give thanks to him, but their thinking became futile. Their foolish hearts were darkened. And although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. This is Romans chapter 1. It gets its name, Romans, from the group of people that Paul is writing to. He's writing to the people of Rome. He's writing around 60 AD, about 30 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He's writing to people living in a massive empire, the Roman Empire. There's an image here for you to just kind of get a picture of how big the Roman Empire is. There's about 60 to 75 million people living in this vast empire. You see the Mediterranean Sea there kind of in the center. All the red, which now represent how many different countries today. That is the picture of the Roman Empire to the people to whom Paul is writing in 60 AD. Rome consisted of a massive road system. There's some 50,000 miles of first-class roads, over 200,000 miles of lesser roads, but all of which provided a way to get around the empire. Religion was significant in the time. People would craft idols made of all different kinds of things to worship multiple gods. Temples, ruins of temples are scattered throughout the Roman Empire for us to go and look at today. Entertainment was a growing thing underneath the leadership of Nero. He built colosseums holding 50,000 people, providing sporting events like chariot races and gladiator events and theater houses where music and plays would be performed. The capital, of course, was the city of Rome itself. There's over 1 million people, and you can see a generated rendition of what Rome would have looked like at the time in which Paul was writing. Now, why do I share all this? I share this to help us to understand these are real people in a real time in history. History tells us, because we can go and we can look through archaeology as well as books that are written down, that the Roman people were highly educated. Children went to school. Rome was a place that shaped culture. It was a powerful place that influenced all of the empire, and it drove the values and ideals. And as I mentioned earlier, Nero was the reigning emperor at this time, and Nero loved to have fun. He's known for a few things: his diplomacy and trade, and then his development of culture. His fingerprints are all over the building of colosseums and theaters to have these athletic games and to provide a place for public banquets and public spectacles. He's known for having party after party after party. The Roman historian Tacitus describes in this paragraph the way in which he would go about his parties. The festivities you see on the side screens here from Tacitus, the Annals of the Imperial Rome. The festivities were held on a small lake populated with exotic birds, fish, and other animals that were imported for the occasion. And guests were floated out on rafts to be lured in one direction or another. On one shore were brothels crowded with noble ladies. On another, naked prostitutes enticing the guests. As darkness descended, torches were lit, the groves and buildings filled with song and laughter, and Nero polluted himself by every lawful and lawless indulgence. If you were to study Nero, you would find that this is just one example of the way that he pursued the fulfillment of his sexual desires, and it was vast. This is the culture that Paul is writing into. Sounds a little bit like 2022, doesn't it? Not too far from the United States, right? When Paul writes to those living in the Roman world, he could be speaking to those of us living today because we are well educated, cultural, creating society in which we send values around the world about sexuality. And oh, do we send those values. We are a culture that's enamored with the titillation of sexual desires. And this month is about it, right? It's about celebrating whomever you are, expressing your sexual desires in whatever way that you choose. And it's presented as truth. Paul has something to say to the church living in Rome and to us living in the United States of America, in Mount Joy, Elizabethtown, Reims, and the surrounding area about human sexuality. Now, there's a lot in this text. I'm going to focus on basically one phrase upon which Paul built a whole argument. And it comes in verse 18 and then again in verse 25. Paul writes, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who," and here's the phrase, "suppress the truth." Suppress the truth. They suppress the truth. They put the truth down. They stomp on the truth. They shove it aside. They do everything to keep the truth down. And then they exchange the truth. Verse 25. They exchange it. They change it out. We don't like the truth, so we're going to change it out for something else, something new. Right? They exchange the truth, Paul says, for a lie. Now that word truth is the Greek word aletheia, and definition, Dictionary Biblical of Languages, defines it in this way. Here's the Greek word, that which is in accord with what really happens. It's the facts that correspond to reality. Now, Oxford gives us a definition. It's so ironic how it's the same definition, right? So we do have an accurate English translation here. The Oxford Dictionary defines truth as the quality or the state of being true, or that which is true or is in accordance with fact or reality. Okay, this is truth, right? Truth is what you can see, what you can cover, what you can... This is the truth. Truth is absolute. 2 plus 2 is 4. The chalkboard, well, the chalkboard when I went to school was green, right? And you could look at it, you could say it's green, but now it's the whiteboard, and so now it's the whiteboard, and you can say it's white because it's reality. You look at it and you see it and you know it's reality, and chocolate is not strawberry because it's chocolate. Right? There's truth. But we live in a culture. We live in a culture that wants to erase that definition and has and does erase the definition of truth. And so now truth is defined as something that's relative. This is culture. This has been going on for a long time. But certainly it's the 40s and the 50s where it embedded itself in American culture. And so we end up with this definition. Next slide, Caden. Relativism is the philosophical idea that knowledge and truth and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context. So the culture can create what is true. We get to decide what is true. I read an article yesterday. California. There was a judge who ruled that a bumblebee can be defined as a fish. You're laughing. I was like, I can't believe this. But a bumblebee is defined as a fish in California by this one judge. Now, you can get in and you can read the article, and it's about all kinds of stuff, and you can read the rationale as to how the judge has concluded that a bumblebee is a fish. But this is the culture we live in, right? And that becomes a news story. It becomes a decision. It becomes a way in which culture in California then lives and functions, right? And we get to define truth how we want to. This is culture. Culture says we can make up truth how we want to, and we're told that is the truth. Right? A judge now told us that a bumblebee is a fish. So that is now true. Because a judge, after all, is this person in significant position within society and can tell us that is the truth. Truth has become relative. It's become relative. A.J. Swoboda, in his book After Doubt, has kind of given us another definition. He says, we've become a culture of expressive individualism. Individuals get to choose their own beliefs based almost exclusively on their desires, their wants, and their goals. It's this whole salad bar approach to life. I'll have a little bit of iceberg lettuce. I'll skip the spinach. I'll put a little bit of eggs on there, a little bit of carrots, skipping the peppers. A few croutons. Leave the bacon bits behind. 6 salad dressings. I'll just take one. Right? And we pick and choose based on what our desire is. This is what it means to be American, right? I need to read my paragraph that I wrote. This is very American, where you and I, we have the freedom to be who we want to be, to self-select our own lifestyle, activities, relationships, and work. The Bill of Rights guarantees that opportunity for us, right? When it states that you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there's something incredibly powerful about these ideals that enable us as a people to be and do what God has made us to be and to do. It's a wonderful thing to live in a culture like that. But there's also a downside. And I think we're on a downside. The downside is this: freedom has been broadened to become an ideal in which everyone can self-determine anything and everything for themselves. We now live in a culture, right, where people can select truth for themselves. There's no standard of truth. There's no such thing as truth anymore. It's your truth versus my truth, right? You have your truth, I have my truth. You do you, I do me. How often do you hear that in our culture? I'm just wondering, is that the truth? Is that really the truth? That you get to determine the truth and I get to determine the truth? Is that really the truth? I mean, it's presented as the truth. It is presented as absolute. Relativism is presented as absolute. And if we don't buy relativism, then there's something wrong with us, right? Now, relativism is an absolute truth that there is no truth. Absolute truth says there is a truth. And that truth exists outside of man. And that truth ought to be uncovered, discovered, and followed because it shapes and dictates the way in which we live our lives. You see, this expressive individualism empowers us to do whatever we want, to follow whatever desires we have, to satisfy whatever feelings we want. And thus, we do exactly what Paul described in Romans chapter 1, verse 18. We suppress, we put down the truth, and we exchange the truth for a lie. That's what's going on in our culture. Paul is telling us this is what's happening in culture. Now, culture doesn't want to accept that. Culture doesn't want to admit it. But this is what Paul is warning us. This is what he's saying is it's happening. And as a result, he says, in verse 21, that mankind neither glorifies God as God, nor do they give thanks to him, and that mankind's thinking has become futile, and that our hearts have become foolish. We're foolish, and we're darkened. We don't see, we don't understand, we think we're really wise when we say truth is relative, and you can pick your truth, and I can pick my truth, and philosophers and people with PhDs and people who study come up with all of these amazing sounding things to defend and to support why relativism is what it is and why it is the truth. And we seem so wise as a culture. Paul says we've become absolute fools. And when people get to this place, Paul tells us that God releases them. God releases people. And so God has released our society. For what? Verse 24. Therefore, God releases us. He gives us over in the sinful desires of our hearts to sexual impurity. When we suppress the truth, when we exchange the truth for a lie, God releases us. You're free to go ahead and satisfy your sexual desires in impure ways in any way that you want for the degrading of your bodies with one another. When Paul was writing these words, he was writing to a culture that was living that out. Archaeology of Pompeii was located 150 miles south of Rome, right in the heart of the Roman Empire, highly influential city. We have amazing artifacts of the city because there was a volcano that exploded, covered the city in ash, and it's preserved so many things. Dr. Scott, in his book, A Fellowship of Difference, talks about, and he writes about a visit that he had to the city of Pompeii. He describes it in this way. He said, Pompeii is a city that was a city that is, it is not an exaggeration to say that the city was swamped with erotic images. Explicit pornography was everywhere. The sensual reality of the city was a total lack of sexual inhibition. The normal order of things in the first century was for most men and some women to have procreational sex with their spouse and recreational sex with others. Those others often included young children and slave girls. Lesbianism was well known, but nowhere near as common as recreational same-sex liaisons between men, many of whom were still married to women. And relations with paid sex workers formed such a major and enduring industry that Rome's most famous orator, Cicero, asked, "When was such a thing not done in Rome?" And so when Paul writes, he's writing about the culture. He looks around, he sees, and he says to the church, the people living around you, they have exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They've suppressed the truth. Truth has become relative to them. It's become expressive individualism. This has become a culture that God has released to pursue its sexual desires in any and every way in which it chooses. America was unique in that when its founding began, it was rooted in biblical truth. Not that all the people were followers of Christ, not that all the people believed that the Bible was authoritative. But in 1776, at the foundation of our country, there were a lot of people who believed that the truth was not relative. Truth was absolute, that there was the truth giver. That began to erode. And by the early 1900s, there's a woman who has highly shaped our culture over the past 100 years. Her name is Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a nurse. She was a sex educator. She established an organization that later became Planned Parenthood. She believed that sexual freedom was the means to transform human nature and to create a new man. Let's say that again. She believed that sexual freedom, expressing your sexual desires in any and every way, however you choose, is the way to freedom. It's in the early 1920s. She writes, in her book, The Pivot of Civilization in 1922, the release of sexual energies is the only method by which a person can find inner peace, security, and beauty. Furthermore, the only method for overcoming social ills is to remove the constraints and prohibitions. In other words, remove what God says are the standards for human sexuality. The only way that we can fix society is to say that God's standards aren't true, which now hinder the release of, because they hinder the release of intersexual energies. They release them. When we can release them, most of the larger evils of society will perish. Through sex, mankind may attain the great spiritual illumination, which will transform the world, which will light up the only path to an earthly paradise. 1922. About 20 years after her followed Alfred Kinsey. He wrote 2 books. Matter of fact, I heard him quoted just last week on NPR. Highly, highly influential, especially in the form of colleges and universities. He was a Darwinism, an evolutionist. He believed that man essentially is no different than the human kingdom, and whatever he could identify and uncover and see animals doing, then he concluded people can and should do. And so when he identified and saw in the animal kingdom that same-gendered animals would have sexual contact, he then concluded that human same-gender can have sexual contact. It's just normal. And then when he saw that some animals from one animal kingdom to another animal species or classification had sexual contact, then he concluded that sex could be anything, including bestiality. He developed what at the time was recognized as being just this groundbreaking ideas about human sexuality. He came up with this scale, and this is what NPR was talking about 2 weeks ago. But here is the Kinsey Scale. He ranks our sexual desires based on, are we heterosexual or homosexual? And it can't be the 2 extremes. There must be stuff in between. And so this is the scale. He believed that sexuality was fluid. It could change over time. He's the father of the modern ideas about the whole LGBTQ movement. I mean, it didn't come from him because Rome was participating in and practicing these things, but scientifically, right? From the pillars of our society, the smartest people. No wonder why today, in the 1920s, the 1940s, and these ideas are circulated in books and taught in college classrooms and universities, and then these ideas are adapted and adopted. And now you can maybe begin to understand why it is that we have Pride Month in 2022. In 1942, there was no such thing. There's no way it would even get close to being anything that would be accepted. But over the past 80 years, things have changed. And our culture has exchanged the truth for a lie, has suppressed the truth, and God has released us to the denigrating of our bodies through any sexual impurity. What's the result of all of this? Well, there's been 2020, over the past, say, 50 years of this groundbreaking work of these pioneers in a new sexual ethic. There's been 63 million abortions, 16 billion STDs in 2021, 20% of the population STDs. There's alarming numbers of children who are born into single-parent families. The divorce rate, the breakdown of the family, the use of drug and alcohol and all kinds of things to push down the hurt and the pain. And this is where we're at as a society. Why? Because society has suppressed the truth. And so, as I close, my question to you just simply is this: what's the truth? What is the truth? See, I'm not going to I can't tell you what you believe is the truth. Just like society can't tell you what you can believe as the truth, right? But you got to think, you got to look, is truth relative or is it absolute? Does this relativistic approach bring about good things or does it bring about destructive things? What is the truth? What do you say is the truth? What do you say is the truth about what culture is suggesting? I encourage you, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. I encourage you as you interact with other people to have these deeper conversations of what is truth and how do you know what truth is? Obviously, my perspective is that truth is rooted in not just some ideas, but truth is rooted in a person, the person Jesus Christ. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus came into the world full of grace and truth. In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. If you want to know truth, then you need to know Jesus, because he is the truth. And I guarantee you, if you get to know Jesus, not to know about Jesus, but you get to know Jesus and you get to know his words, which he also declares as the truth, it shapes your life not in negative ways, but in positive ways. Yes, there is a sexual ethic that will restrict the way in which you behave. Yes, it stands in contradiction, and maybe that is disappointing. But it's better. It's far, far better. And as we unpack this series, we'll be building a case for why it is better to believe that the Bible is the authoritative Word of God, that it shapes your life and makes your life better. The Apostle Paul, he said these words. He said just earlier, 16 and 17, we looked at 18 to 25. He said, I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel, the good news, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as is written, the righteous will live by faith. The gospel is good news. It is good news that you cannot save yourself. It is good news that there is a better way to live. Do you know the gospel? Have you received the gospel? Do you live according to the gospel? The gospel is simply this: there is a God. I sin against him. I can't make my way to him. He came to earth as the person, God and man, Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. He died in your place. He died in my place. And if we just simply call out to him, confessing, he will come and he will forgive us of our sin. And that sends us on a trajectory of pursuing him that transforms radically our lives. Do you know Jesus? Are you following Jesus? Would you pray with me? Worship team, come on up. Jesus, I thank you for Paul. I thank you for speaking through him to a culture that is identical to ours. Oh, help us as we live in this culture to be bold as Paul was bold and to stand for the truth even when the culture calls something else true. Help us to not shrink back, to not be afraid, but also to be incredibly gracious and compassionate, recognizing that people who don't understand have their minds blinded, their eyes blinded, their hearts hardened. Jesus, would you open dark eyes? Would you soften hard hearts? Would you use us, your church, to communicate these truths to people who are struggling and wanting help in life? Cause your gospel to spread in this community. We ask that you do this, and then we would be able to see you breaking down these barriers. That you would you just bring a fresh wind of the Spirit, bring a revival to our country. Come, Lord Jesus, come. I ask these things in your name. Amen.